So I asked to do this today because I'm a big sci-fi geek and a big fan of China Mieville, and this is the first time there's been an adaptation of any of his works for the screen, which is kind of amazing. Given
You
the
should give him a
fact that-
shout out, actually, because I think he's
somewhere.
here.
Trying to hear.
He's
And,
hiding.
can I just say, thank you.
The good news is that he's still here.
we may ask you a couple of questions, China, now we're in the audience. So I was going to ask, but maybe you can close your eyes to this. Who in the audience came to this because of knowing China's work? Yeah, there's a strong fan base there.
And me too.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, Tony and I have known each other for a long time, and we were talking, meeting up, and he said he was adapting this. But I knew China's work, and I was a huge fan of his work. And so it's interesting for me because when I read stuff, books or articles, I quite often think, "Oh, will this make a film?" And I'm always thinking about it as a film or a TV. And with this, I read it, and I had that thought for a bit, and then it went, and I was just reading the book. I was thinking, because it's such a complex and wonderful world. So when Tony said he was reading it, I thought, great, it's fantastic.
So,
Yeah.
Tony, why did you think this book of all that you wanted to adapt? What was it about it that you?
I didn't think you could do it, really. I mean, also, I didn't know the book. I knew some of China's other work, and I had seen him speak at a couple of festivals. I didn't know him at the time at all. And I was sent the book by Mammoth, and they said, "Do you want to read it and tell us if you would like to adapt it?" And I took a long time over it because it's tricky,
Yeah.
It's very tricky. It's this idea of these two cities coexisting, but it would have been easy had they been sort of, two universes, but they weren't. The whole point was that it was a learned thing. You learn to unsee, to unhear, to unperceive the other city which is just there. And that's one thing in prose, but when you're talking about a film or a TV show, you start to wonder how, what do you see? How can you do that?
Yes.
And so I just thought that if you stuck to point of view, and as we're really with Borlu's point of view throughout, we see what he sees. So there's talk about this other city. And that's the other problem. There's a lot of exposition, so it's a tricky bit of business to sort of distill and fillet your way through that.
Yes.
So if we see what Borlu sees, so occasionally when he's in a very heightened state, he might glimpse the other city. He might choose to transgress, but we see what he sees for the most part. Now and again, you sit back and you see the two cities in a more objective way. But on the whole, the key for me was about point of view.
And you're right. I mean, the whole book and the whole TV production is about this interplay between what you're choosing to see, what you're choosing not to see, what you're choosing to show, and what you're choosing to tell, or something.
Yeah.
So in terms of how you wrote the script, how did you? I don't normally ask these technical questions, but for this I think it's interesting. How did you manifest that in the script? So you're looking through his point of view, but how did you describe what he wasn't seeing?
I would describe what he wasn't seeing. You would only hear about it. There would be
hear it.
discussion about it. You would only see what he sees. And that held good throughout.
Right.
And then you start to bend that rule now and again when you want to, when you choose to. And then it went on. I mean, there's a very important person not here. It's Tom Shanklin who directed it, because he's got another job. And him and his designer and cinematographer and so on, they went on and started to find a visual way of seeing the two cities, and so they became color-coded,
Right.
and so on. And although Beigel is crumbling and doesn't, it's a bit like London in some ways. It doesn't work quite well. It's multicultural and so on. Ulcoma is glass and steel, and it's more mono and so on. But so these things develop.
And how closely did you work with Tom? Do you normally just write the script and go, right, I don't want to know, do your thing? Or
No
did you
way,
say...
no. Well, just wave goodbye to him. No.
How closely did you work with him on it?
You have to work closely. You work in different ways and closely with everyone. I mean, I can't remember how many drafts before Tom came on board, but then the first thing would be that he read them, then he had his extensive notes. I mean, Tom writes longer notes than my screenplays.
Right.
And then we discuss, and you try things and you alter things, and we kept that alive all the way through, so that even when you're shooting, as David will tell you, there were new pages that would arrive. But I enjoy working like that. It keeps everything, it keeps all the options open. It keeps things, it rather than lock something off, I think is a ridiculous way to work.
And Preethi, what about your involvement? So you're inside the BBC, you're exec producing.
I work at Mammoth, actually.
Oh, you're at Mammoth, excuse me. So tell us about your involvement. So what stage were you, did Tony bring the project to you? Did you
We took it to Tony.
Or?
So like many people here, there are lots of China medieval fans at Mammoth, and so it's a huge desire to adapt his work. And I guess you could argue that The City in the City is maybe the ideal one for adaptation. I mean, you always knew it was not a challenge, but as a noir thriller, I thought there's a way into it. But we also knew we had to have a big brain, Tony, to adapt it to screen. So we took it to Tony, and after we'd managed to persuade China to allow us to adapt it, and then Tony kind of took ownership of it and came up with the invention of Katrinia, which I think was a big kind of step forward in terms of how it was going to go work for screen. Okay. And then we took it to Tom Shankland, and then, as Tony was saying, Tom was quite involved relatively early in terms of the process, which really helped, because I think in terms of everything that needed to be done to make the cities work and to really portray the distinctive, the contrast between the cities, that took a lot of thought about every kind of layer of doing that. So that's when Tom got involved.
It's a real tight relationship between writer and director on this piece, particularly, I think, for sure. So
also, there was sorry, it's worth mentioning that China would read different versions of the scripts, not all of them, because there were so many thousands of versions, but a lot of them, and was always very knew from the get-go that there was the novel, and here was a screenplay, here was a TV show, and that there would be differences, but was always generous and supportive, and thanks for that.
China, can we ask you a question? Can I ask you a question? Is that all right? To get you out from under the shadows. How was this? This was your first adaptation of your book for screen. What did you discover through that process?
Well, as Tony was sort of adverting to, I tried to sort of keep a respectful distance from quite early on, partly because I can imagine that having a writer who is being very sort of possessive and treating it as if it's their book is a nightmare for everyone involved. Partly because it's a different project, it's a different grammar, it's a TV program. So I was very interested, and I wanted to I would always chip in and say, this I think is great, I'm not sure about this, but ultimately I was always very clear it was sort of their decision and so on. But it was extremely moving watching the process. I mean, that might sound like an odd adjective to use, but honestly, the process of watching the adaptation, both on the paper, but then particularly going up to the set, I found incredibly moving. And I'm going to say one thing that sounds really brown-nosy, but is really true, is not that I didn't have respect before, but I came away with hugely increased respect for actors. Like, watching actors do the thing was extraordinary. I found it completely mesmeric. Like, when I came back from the set, a lot of people my friends who'd seen sets at work, there's this kind of hoary wisdom and people going, oh, it's so boring, right, all those takes. And I was like, no, I could have watched it all day. I found it absolutely incredible watching people kind of get back into it and try it different ways and so on. So, so there you go.
It's a real act of generosity, isn't it? And just a last quick one. So in terms of visually, obviously this has lived inside your head and now it's outside of your head. Does it visually look and feel like you imagined it when you wrote it?
Particularly Beshel. I mean, I think the version there are some pronunciation differences, but I'm fairly relaxed about that. Yeah, we'll talk later. Beshel in particular to me is absolutely right. You know, I was really struck by that and the colour scheme and so on. And I was very concerned, as Tony was saying, about the process of the shift. You know, and there's various different ways you could do it, I think. And I was open-minded, except for what I knew I didn't want. You know, so it wasn't like I was saying, you know, this is the way I think it should be done. What I did say, I think quite explicitly, was this is the way I would be really unhappy if it were done. And it wasn't done that way at all. And the whole kind of slightly off-kilter reflection, or the kind of, you know, water on glass, and the kind of, you know, that sort of out of focus thing. It wasn't what I had in my mind, but I thought it was extremely effective, and I'm not just saying that. Okay.
Mandeep, this is a really different role for you. I'm used to giggling at your performances. Yeah. I giggled a bit at this one. So tell us about how you came to this project and what attracted you to it.
I read the script, what was amazing, and confusing but amazing. And then auditioned, literally done a self-tape, went in, met Tom, and then got the part. And yeah, it was brilliant. It was fun, a lot of fun. Yeah. Especially working with David. Yeah, it was brilliant. And so different to what I've done.
Yeah, exactly.
Compared to Some Girls and stuff, which is full-on comedy.
Yes. And in terms of sort of process and production, how different was it, I guess? What was the kind of main difference between... I mean, this really is cinematic TV making, isn't it, in many ways?
I didn't really want to think about it when I was filming, because that would put me off. I didn't want to read the book either before, because that would have put me off. I didn't want to watch any of his work, because that would put me off.
You and everyone else.
Fair enough.
So I actually just kind of, day by day, took it day by day. Otherwise, I'd be like, oh, you know. Yeah, so day by day.
Mm. And Tony, when you were writing, did you have David in mind for this? You didn't know?
No, I mean, I'm always thinking about David, of course.
You've worked.
No, I didn't. And I don't. When I'm writing, I don't have an actor in mind usually at all. In fact, I'd be sort of. It's a bit like you were saying just now. Something I don't want to think about in a way, because I'm nervous about. You know, I just want to stick with the characters. Yes. That's all I'm interested in. But what then happened is that when me and Tom met David in this restaurant, and and then you went away and left me and Tom, and we looked at you and said, "Do you think he'll say yes?" I hope he said it. Anyway, then he did say yes, and then you look back over the scripts and you think it could only be him, and then it was weird, and then you think, oh, it's like it was written.
It is strange you say that, because I think most of your work, I always think you must have written this role specifically for that actor, because you can't imagine
just
anyone
good
else.
actors, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like their sort of their team that they make in the show.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing to watch. You know, and has a long way to go, by the way.
Yeah.
I think exactly like you've just done. You know, you tried it, you tested it, and you tested it on yourself. What you don't do is you don't imagine that the audience is one thing. You don't make the big mistake and imagine that the audience are dumber than you. Things like that. So you're doing it for yourself. And this was particularly tough because there's such high-end concepts in this all the time. And, you know, just when you got to grips with the idea of there being two cities, there's a third one crops up, you know. And then there's this wife, you know. And you do it like you did it. You test it on yourself. You try it out. And also, there was a long period of writing. So there were many, many versions of the script for a really good reason, because all the time it was being distilled. And it wasn't just me sitting on my own. There was a very amazing team at Mammoth that were very, very supportive. There was Tom. There were a lot of people around asking good questions, helping me test. So that's the clearest I can be.
How long, Tony, were you writing? When you say it was a long period, how long would long
Years
be?
and years. Well, I first read the book towards the end of 2013. So, you know, and I finished writing. Well, I just finished writing it just now. So.
weeks ago.
The script's really good now.
They had a very special filter on the lens that they would use quite a lot. But there was lots of different techniques.
Some of it's done in visual effects in post-production as well.
But also, I think, we filmed the two. They didn't split like Bejel and Olcoma, but we filmed some of it in Liverpool and some in Manchester.
Which was the posh one?
I'm not saying. But, and the reason we filmed in those two cities was because, there's so much filming. All of Peaky Blinders is filmed up in there as well. Is because of that architecture, because there is the cities, cheek by jowl, have modern architecture and old sort of Victorian, Edwardian architecture right next to each other. So a lot of it, there's one scene later on that Mandeep and I do in the middle of Manchester. And on her side is, we had a wonderful design team who did it all for us. But I mean, they were there as well, so we have an old glass one side and Victorian buildings the other. So sometimes we could do it in camera as well, it wasn't that. And then you just have to train yourself not to look left or right.
It does seem the right time for this film for that reason.
I don't think we have to look, that whole thing of that. It's not a big leap for us to have to imagine what it's like to live in a city where you don't see people who exist on the very streets that we walk down. You don't have to, it's not a big leap of faith to know that we live in our houses and we ignore people who live at the end of our road. That's it. We all live in cities like that, and this city is teeming with that type of sensibilities that we train ourselves to have invisible people who are at our feet all the time. And that's what this drama just pushes that. The book pushes that idea that we're not allowed to interact with certain people around who live right here, right now, and it's just accentuating that, and that's what we do.
Well, we took our I think the lead very much came from the book, and the language of Bejel and the names of the streets and places and so on. That's where that began, and that was sort of followed through. I don't think you want to pin it down too much, otherwise it loses the possibility. You don't want to. It's not, here's east and here's west. It ain't that, but it's playing with those ideas.
There's something analog about Bejel. There's something, there is something in there that, you see the phones and stuff like that. So there is something about that. And when he gets to Olcoma, it's a very modern, clean, quite militarized place. So, there's those things that you're playing with as well.
Yeah, we had an advice called Professor Alison Long who devised the whole Dhillon language for us. So the script does follow rules. There is grammar. There are hundreds of words now.
Can you say hello?
No, don't ask me to.
Hello.
It's amazing, that detail. I mean, how long was it in sort of development and production for? Was it literally
that process took some time, but I think we felt it had to be. It was really important because it's all about the detail.
The actors really went for it. The actors, because obviously I can't speak it, and I get there and I have like pidgin Olcoman, but there's the actors who are in the Olcoman side. They really got it, and it was fantastic to work with them. And just they come on and they go for it. And it's so that sort of alienation for me was fantastic.
Yeah.
That was the convention, is that in Bejel we hear them speaking English, even though the signs, the lettering is slightly different and so on. But with Olcoma, that's a totally different language, and so you have fun with the translation and so on.
And can I actually, I'll come to it one second, but a quick question about working with speculative fiction, because this is the additional that's in there. You're creating, it's world building, isn't it? So was that an extra, did that kind of put extra pressure on the production in a way, or did that extend what you would normally do on a production, or not necessarily?
It's not pressure. I mean, there is a whole additional creative aspect to it. I mean, I wish Tom Shankland was here, because he'd be able to be more articulate about it than me, but there was a whole Bible and rule book and guidelines that had to be created in advance so that every department that worked on the show could follow those guidelines. You couldn't really make it up as you go along. Lots of decisions had to be made up front so that it felt like it wasn't confusing for an audience. I mean, there's plenty of things that can be confusing enough in this, but you to know that when you go from one city to the other city, even if you're getting a glimpse of one city and then another city, that you know which is which city.
Yeah.
But like all those things, I mean, I think there are the rules of the worlds, there are the laws, the things you have to. But the emotional story is the emotional story that we know and love. You know, we all respond to. You respond to the people inside the story and what they're emotionally going through. Their the restrictions on their life and stuff like that is given to us. But what's driving them, what's breaking them, what's sort of making them full of joy, they're universal, as is our world. So it's all about that, really. You know what? The golden TV of drama is a bit like the golden team of England, really, the golden football generation. It's always coming up. It's like, you know, and it's always sort of like 5 years behind me in some way. You know, it's always been around. I think the one thing that's happening now is it's a massive playing field. You know, there's lots of things opening up, but the programs we've got to make have still got to be good, you know. And I think that long-form television, you know, sometimes you get hooked in, and whether they've got the legs to carry on. But it's not. I think television has really now become the place where good writers, good directors can come and express themselves. It's not seen like the poor relation to film anymore. But there's a lot of places for people to go, so the market is quite chocker. So it's just you've got to really punch your weight. What I love about this show, you know, I get sent a lot of scripts. It's really different. You know, this is a different world, different worlds. It's asking a lot of you, you know, and I like that. Like Tony was saying, it's not spoon feeding you story and plot. You have to engage with it in many levels, and that's what I like about it. You look for roles that are different. There is something about, you know, I'm 6'3" and stuff like that, so you do tend to get like guys who come in and kick ass a bit. But I mean, this is different. There's a real different vulnerability about Bolu that I really like. He's slightly spinning from the off, really. Sometimes I get to characters that sort of something happens down the line, but you can see his torment very quickly, and it's reflected in the world around him as well as his interior story himself. So I like that. I like what was going on around it. The important thing to say for me about this was it was just so great to do, in the sense that every department turned up. You know, it's asking questions of all of us, and I think that's what we like. You know, it was challenging in every aspect of what we had to do, and I'm very proud of it and everybody that worked on it, really. Well, I knew the book, and I loved the book, and I knew Tony, and so the team, before even I read the script, the team was great. I'd loved Tom Shanklin's work in the past, but it was great. I mean, you know, I'm in it a lot. That always helps me. Maybe that's where my weary naturalism came from. That was at every scene. But it was a ride, you know. It was fun and challenging, and just, you know, you want to create that world. One of the things for me is sometimes you read a script and you think, how would I feel if there was another actor doing that? And you think of those actors and you think, I'm doing it, you know. So that's the thing, and I really loved this character right from the bat. So that was there.
That will have to be our last question, but thank you so much for bringing this to us, because I think this is probably something very exciting for you guys to watch also, because it is such an original creation. It really is, and we're really lucky. Tell everybody it's coming out in April, and I can't wait to see the next episodes.
Thanks very much.
Tony Grisoni, thank you very much. Thank you, Mandeep. Thank you, David. Thank you, Preethi. Thank you so much, and thank you all. Thanks for your questions.